I am a 34-year-old woman, and I never imagined that the story of my life would be marked by betrayal, abandonment, and the kind of wounds that time alone cannot heal. If you are listening to this, I want you to understand that what I am about to share is not just some bitter memory I can shrug off. It's the kind of story that carved itself into my bones, a story I've carried in silence for years, because the truth was too heavy, too ugly, and too complicated for anyone outside to truly understand. It began when I was in my early 20s, barely finding my footing in the world. I had just graduated from college and I returned home to help my parents on the farm. My older brother David was already married by then to a woman named Marissa. I still remember when he first introduced her to us. She was stunning in the way that made people stop and stare, long black hair, flawless skin, a smile that could light up an entire room. But behind that beauty, there was something else, something sharp. I noticed it even then, the way her eyes lingered too long on things she wanted, as if she was always calculating. David adored her. He gave her everything he could. And when their son Jacob was born, I thought things might finally settle into something resembling a happy family. Jacob was my little sunshine. I was only 24 when he was born, and I poured my love into him as if he were my own child. He had these wide brown eyes that always seemed to be searching the world for something more, and a laugh that could dissolve my worst days in an instant. But Marissa, she wasn't the kind of mother Jacob needed. She was restless. She hated the quiet life of the farm, hated the endless responsibilities of raising a child. She would vanish for hours, sometimes days, chasing her own pleasures, leaving Jacob with me, with my parents, or even alone with his father, who worked sunup to sundown just to provide. I never said it out loud then, but I could see the cracks forming. I could feel it. Something wasn't right. And then one day, everything shattered. Jacob was 5 years old. I remember it as vividly as if it happened yesterday. The morning had started out like any other, with my father already in the fields, my mother in the kitchen, and me trying to get Jacob to eat his breakfast because he was too busy drawing dinosaurs on napkins. Marissa had announced she was taking Jacob for a short trip, something about a picnic in the mountains. I thought it was strange because she never had the patience for things like that, but I didn't argue. She was his mother. I couldn't stop her. That night she came back alone. I don't think I'll ever forget the way she walked through the door, her hair messy, her clothes smudged with dirt, but her face cold, detached. David rushed to her asking where Jacob was, and she simply said, "He ran off." I couldn't find him. Ran off, as if a 5-year-old could just vanish in the middle of the mountains. The panic that gripped our family was indescribable. My father and David gathered neighbors and search parties. My mother collapsed in tears, clutching Jacob's little jacket that Marissa had tossed onto the chair like it was nothing more than trash. I joined the search, running through the forest until my legs gave out, screaming Jacob's name into the emptiness until my voice broke. For days we searched. For weeks the police questioned Marissa, but she stuck to her story. She claimed Jacob slipped away and she couldn't find him. Deep down I knew. We all knew. She left him there. She wanted freedom, and Jacob had been the chain around her ankle. But no proof ever surfaced. No body, no trace, nothing. The mountains swallowed him whole, and Marissa was never charged with anything. The day the search was called off, something inside me died. David was never the same again. He drowned himself in work, his eyes hollow, his body moving like a machine with no soul. My mother never spoke Jacob's name again without trembling. And me, I couldn't forgive myself. I kept replaying that morning, wondering if I could have stopped her, wondering why I hadn't screamed, "No, don't take him." The guilt ate me alive. As for Marissa, she disappeared not long after. One morning she packed her bags, left a note on the table saying she couldn't live in the shadow of grief anymore, and vanished from our lives. For 10 years we heard nothing. 10 long years of silence, of unanswered questions, of nights, I lay awake imagining Jacob's face, his little hands, his laughter, and then the way the mountains might have swallowed his cries. But then, as life has a cruel way of doing, she returned. 10 years later, she walked back into town as if nothing had happened. Older, yes, but still beautiful, still carrying herself with that same cold confidence. And with her return came something else: secrets. I wasn't ready for truths I never could have imagined, and the kind of rage that can burn a soul from the inside out. Because when she came back, she wasn't alone. I first saw him on a rainy afternoon. I had been at the market picking up groceries for my mother when a small, drenched figure stumbled past the stalls. My heart stopped. That familiar brown-eyed gaze, the way it searched the world with both fear and curiosity, hit me like a lightning bolt. Jacob. My Jacob. I dropped everything and ran. My hands shook as I reached him, tears mixing with the rain, and he looked up at me confused, hesitant, like he didn't fully recognize me. And in that moment, everything I had carried inside me for 10 years, the guilt, the anger, the nights, I cried myself to sleep imagining him lost, came rushing to the surface. Jacob. My voice was barely a whisper, yet it carried more hope and fear than any words could bear. He blinked slowly. Aunt. His voice was cautious, almost foreign, a strange echo of the little boy I had known. The years had hardened him, and yet he was still my Jacob, the same little boy who had once clung to my neck in the mornings before school, who had whispered secrets into my ear during sleepless nights. I didn't know where to start. The questions crowded me, each one sharper than the last. Where had he been all these years? Who had raised him? How could Marissa just abandon him? And the one I feared most of all, did he even remember us? It took a long while for him to speak. He told me bits and pieces, fragments of a life I hadn't imagined. He had survived the mountains by chance, by cunning, by sheer will. He had been taken in by a hermit, an old man who lived in a cabin near the ridge, someone who had taught him to hunt, to fend for himself, to stay alive. Jacob had learned more about the cruelty and harshness of the world in those years than any child should ever know. And Marissa, she hadn't come back for him out of remorse. She came back because she needed something only Jacob or the fact of her past actions could provide. She had not changed. That realization cut me deeper than any knife. The woman who abandoned her son, who left him to survive alone in the wilderness, was the same woman standing in our town, expecting forgiveness, expecting life to carry on, as if a decade of trauma had never occurred. When I confronted her, the rage inside me surged like a river breaking its banks. The years of unanswered prayers, the nights I had lain awake imagining her cruelty, the tears I had shed for a boy who was still alive, but scarred beyond measure, it all came spilling out. I told her what she had done. I told her the nights she stole from all of us, the years she robbed Jacob of love, security, a childhood. And she smiled. That same cold, knowing smile. It was as if she had rehearsed this moment for 10 years and had finally arrived at her performance. She needed to be free, she said. Her words were casual, almost flippant, as if she were talking about leaving a grocery list behind rather than abandoning her own child. You can't cage the spirit of a child. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to make her understand the magnitude of her crime. But what I realized in that moment was that she would never understand. Marissa never felt remorse. She had never loved Jacob in the way a mother should, and she never would. So I made a choice. I turned away from her, from the venom that she had poured into our lives, and I focused on Jacob. I became the mother she had failed to be. I listened to his stories, held his hands through nightmares, celebrated the small victories of a boy learning to trust the world again. And slowly, painfully, he began to remember laughter, began to remember love, began to remember what it meant to be safe. But even as we rebuilt what we could, the shadow of Marissa lingered. I would catch him staring at her from across the street when she appeared in town, and I knew he had questions I could not yet answer. He had lived through the wilderness of his mother's betrayal, and now he was learning the wilderness of her presence once more. And then the evidence began to surface. Things she had hidden from everyone, from David, from me, even from herself. Documents, letters, secrets. Little breadcrumbs that revealed how far she had gone to erase Jacob from our lives, how meticulously she had tried to rewrite history in her favor. Every revelation burned like acid on open wounds, and yet there was a part of me that felt vindicated. The truth was finally out. The lies she had built her life on were crumbling, and I realized that revenge wasn't just about punishment. It was about reclaiming what had been stolen, about restoring the innocence and dignity of a child who had survived horrors no one should endure. Jacob began to call me Mom, not because I demanded it, but because he felt it in his heart, in the way I stayed, in the way I loved, and in the way I refused to let him go. And each time he said it, it was like healing a piece of myself I had thought lost forever. But the climax of our story was still waiting, hidden in the quiet corners of town, in the conversations whispered behind closed doors. Marissa, it turned out, had made powerful enemies, people who had suffered at her hands, people who had been quietly plotting the day she would have to answer for her past. And when that day came, when she faced the consequences of 10 years of abandonment and deceit, the justice we had all longed for was finally within reach. The confrontation was nothing like I had imagined. I thought it would be loud, dramatic, filled with shouting and tears, but in truth, it was almost surgical in its precision. I had spent the past months gathering everything, documents, testimony from neighbors who had suspected her, even small admissions she had carelessly left behind over the years. I didn't need to yell. The evidence spoke louder than any scream. And when Jacob finally stepped forward to speak for himself, to recount the years of survival, the bravery he had been forced to summon, it felt like the universe itself was righting a terrible wrong. Seeing her reaction was almost surreal. For the first time, I watched the woman who had once seemed untouchable crumble. She tried to maintain that same icy composure, but it faltered under the weight of truth. And I realized in that moment that she was powerless, not because of anything I had done, but because she had built her life on a foundation of lies. Lies that could not withstand a decade of grief, trauma, and unflinching truth. Jacob didn't just testify, he shone. He spoke about the mountains, the hermit who had cared for him, the lessons he had learned about resilience and survival, and most importantly, about the love he had never stopped believing existed. His voice was steady, strong, full of the raw emotion of a child who had faced unimaginable abandonment, yet refused to be broken. And I couldn't hold back my tears as I watched him step fully into his own power, reclaiming the boyhood and innocence that had been stolen from him. I won't lie, the process was exhausting. Every memory of that night he was taken, every silent scream I had carried, every pang of guilt, it all rose up again as we navigated legal battles, confronting Marissa with the force of years she could no longer deny. But there was a strange, almost liberating beauty in it. For once, the victim could speak. The lost child could be found. And I, despite everything I had endured, could finally look her in the eye without fear or trembling. In the quiet aftermath, when Jacob and I returned to our home, the sense of peace was almost overwhelming. The mountains no longer loomed as a place of terror in our imaginations. They were now a symbol of endurance, of a boy who had survived against impossible odds. We began the slow process of healing together. Nights were still filled with whispers, confessions of fear and guilt. But every day I watched him grow stronger, more certain of who he was, and the family who truly loved him. There were moments of heartbreak, too. David had never fully recovered from the grief of losing his son, and although he was alive to see Jacob return, the emptiness in his heart remained a reminder that some scars never fully heal. And my parents, who had carried the weight of helplessness for so many years, found themselves learning how to love a grandson who was both familiar and foreign, bridging the gap of 10 lost years. As for Marissa, her life quietly unraveled. The legal consequences, the exposure of her deceptions, and the moral weight of her actions forced her into a corner she could never escape. She became a ghost in our town, a cautionary tale whispered by neighbors who had once admired her beauty and charm. She had believed that cunning and charm could erase accountability, but she underestimated one thing: truth. And truth, as painful as it is, always has a way of surfacing. Yet even as we celebrated the victory of reclaiming Jacob, I understood that this story wasn't just about revenge. It was about resilience, about the human spirit's capacity to endure unimaginable pain and still find a way to love. Every hug with Jacob, every quiet evening we spent talking about the mountains, every laugh that echoed through our home, it was a testament to survival, to hope, to the unbreakable bond between family. And through it all, I realized something profound about myself. I am stronger than I ever believed. I had been forced to confront betrayal, loss, and grief in a way few ever have, and I emerged not hardened, but fiercely protective of those I love. My heart still bears the scars, yes, but those scars are a map of survival, of battles fought and won, of a life reclaimed. Jacob is 10 years older now, a young man with a spark that no trauma could ever extinguish. And while the shadow of the past will always linger, it no longer defines us. We have stories to write, memories to create, and a bond forged in fire that no one, not even the woman who abandoned him, can ever erase. As I sit here reflecting on the journey, I realize that revenge, while satisfying in some moments, pales in comparison to the restoration of love, trust, and family. That is the true victory. That is the legacy we carry forward. Even now, years later, I can still feel the echoes of that first terrible night, the emptiness when Jacob disappeared, the helplessness that clung to my bones like a second skin. But I've learned that memory, as painful as it is, can also be a compass. It guides us toward empathy, toward vigilance, toward a love that refuses to let go, even when the world turns cruel. I watch Jacob now walking through our small town with a quiet confidence, and I know he carries those same lessons in his heart, that survival is not just about enduring pain, but about transforming it into strength. There were days when I wondered if I had failed him, that somehow my inability to stop Marissa, my silence in the moments I could have acted differently, had left him irreparably broken. But I have come to understand that resilience is not born from perfection. It is born from love, from consistency, from the unwavering presence of someone who refuses to abandon you, even when life has. That is what I strove to be for Jacob. That is what I hope he sees in me every time he looks into my eyes and calls me mom. Rebuilding our lives was not a linear path. Jacob struggled to reconcile the boy who survived alone in the mountains with the young man he had become. There were nights when nightmares shook him awake, when he would wake me with tears streaming down his face, murmuring the horrors of what he had endured. I held him close and whispered the truths he needed to hear, that he was not alone, that he was safe now, and that the people who truly loved him would never leave him behind again. Slowly, over months and years, those whispered truths became the foundation of his healing. David, my brother, has found his own fragile peace. He still carries the weight of his son's absence, and there are moments when grief presses him down, when he longs for the years he lost. But watching Jacob reclaim the childhood stolen from him has softened the shadow around my brother's heart. I have seen him laugh again, if only occasionally, and it feels like a fragile promise that life, even after devastation, can offer small victories. Marissa remains a haunting figure in the periphery. We do not forgive her, and I do not believe forgiveness is warranted in cases like hers. She cannot undo the years of fear, the nights alone in the dark, the lessons Jacob had to learn about survival and self-reliance. And yet, paradoxically, her absence has taught us something invaluable: the importance of presence. The value of showing up not just physically, but emotionally to the people who depend on you. Her choices cast shadows, but those shadows have also illuminated the strength within us. There is a moment I will never forget: the first time Jacob smiled freely, without caution, without hesitation, without the weight of fear clouding his expression. We were sitting on the porch, the sun dipping below the horizon, and he simply turned to me and said, "I'm glad you never left me." My throat tightened. Those 5 words contained a decade of pain, hope, fear, and ultimately, love. And in that instant, I realized that our journey, as harrowing as it was, had led to something pure, something unshakable, a bond that even the cruelest betrayal could never sever. In reflecting on everything we endured, I understand now that the story of Jacob's survival and our eventual reunion is also my story, a story of transformation. The betrayal and abandonment I experienced could have hardened me, could have left me bitter and unforgiving. But instead, I chose to channel every ounce of anguish into protection, into nurturing, into reclaiming the life that had been threatened by cruelty. I realize that true strength does not come from vengeance alone. It comes from persistence, from nurturing hope in the face of despair, and from embracing love even when it feels dangerous or impossible. To anyone listening who has faced betrayal, abandonment, or trauma, I want you to know this: your story is not over. You have the power to rewrite the chapters that pain tried to dictate. You have the strength to reclaim what was taken, to nurture what was almost lost, and to teach the world that resilience is born not from absence of suffering, but from the courage to continue despite it. Jacob and I still have scars, and our memories will never be erased. But each scar is a testament to survival, each tear a reminder of love that endured, and each shared smile a promise that even the deepest wounds can eventually find healing. And so, as I end this story, I want to leave you with a truth I have learned with every fiber of my being. Betrayal may break you, abandonment may wound you, but love has the power to rebuild, to redeem, and to make even the darkest past feel like a distant shadow behind the light we create today. If this story moved you, please consider liking this video, sharing it with someone who might need to hear it, subscribing to follow more heartfelt true stories, and leaving a comment with your thoughts or experiences. Sharing our stories reminds us that no one is truly alone, and that even in our deepest pain, hope and resilience can prevail.